Welcome back, folks, to my Rilton Cup recap. This is part 2, so if you missed part 1, definitely check that out first. But in this video, I'll be reviewing my rounds 4 through 6. And yeah, so starting the tournament with 1 out of 3 was definitely not the best, but I still felt like, okay, there's a lot of chess to play. And I was actually pretty nervous about my round 4 game because I'm paired against a Swedish IM, Axel Ornstein. And he hadn't been doing well in the tournament, but I saw in the same tournament the previous year, he had scored pretty well, especially with white. So I really wasn't sure what to expect from this game. I believe he's like a retired player now. He's like much older and used to be a lot higher rated. But he still has, you know, that kind of experience, which makes players like this very dangerous if you catch them on a good day. So I wasn't sure what to expect from the opening, but I prepared the Sicilian. He played e4. I went c5. Knight f3, knight c6, d4, takes. And here lately, I've mainly been playing the Sveshnikov with knight f6. For this game, I decided to go with the Kalashnikov. Just felt like it's an interesting surprise weapon. He might not be super up to date with the latest theory. And I also felt like, you know, I'll get a very fighting position out of the opening. And this ended up working out pretty well because he started spending lots of time as we got through the opening. And I believe he didn't play the opening in the best possible way. So like bishop e3, this isn't the main move. Generally here, white is either going c4 or knight c3 are the main lines. And I wasn't like totally sure what to do in the opening, but I think I ended up getting a pretty healthy position. a6, debatable whether black really needed this move. His move here, knight c3, surprised me, but I felt like the idea was to try and play a4 and not allow black to play a6, b5 with tempo. So I played a6 here, inducing a4, bishop e7, castles, and now kind of important move for this type of structure, knight b4, which looks a little funny the first time you see it. But actually, I could have even played this one move earlier. I think here would have been even more accurate before bishop e7. But the point is that black takes control over the d5 square, and eventually black will break with d5, which generally is an equalizer in the Sicilian. And the knight on b4 looks weird, like it's kind of floating, but white doesn't actually have a great way of attacking this one. And then once black plays d5, the bishop opens up and defends the knight. So it's kind of this like interesting outpost that we sometimes get in the Sicilian. So I end up using it one move later. And yeah, here white played f4, which is very understandable, probably not a great move. Basically, black is ready to play d5 very soon and kind of free the position. I guess bishop f3 here or something, and white is probably okay. I think the engine gives this as equal after takes, and kind of important move knight c3. Not the most obvious move to give up the dark square bishop, but then white is left with this kind of nice bishop on the diagonal. So white was still very much okay, but with f4, I think starts to go a bit wrong. I took on f4, just typical decision, ef4, and now d5. And yeah, I felt very good about my situation here because my king isn't really too unsafe. I can just castle at any moment and get the rook in. And my position is opening up, and I felt like the pieces are going to be very active here. Like I have queen b6 check, and then the rook comes in. And yeah, it just looks tremendously fun for black already. If takes, knight takes d5, white basically has issues with the bishop, like doesn't have such a great square. There's like knight e3 in the position in case of bishop g3, queen b6 check as well, and I felt like black's 2 bishops here are very, very good. So d5, e5 was played. I definitely thought about knight d7 here, but to me knight e4 looked quite challenging. And here the point is I'm turning queen b6 check and knight f2, so white has to kind of take, d takes e4. And I felt like if white goes for this endgame, this one would be pretty unpleasant because black is hitting the c2 pawn. This e pawn is really cramping white's position. I can castle here and then just keep improving the pieces like bishop d5. And yeah, I felt like black is already kind of playing for 2 results in the endgame. Knight d5 also important idea here to target the bishop. So here white goes knight d2. Just actually possibly even a losing move. I think knight c3 was pretty much the only only move to keep white in the game. The point is, after knight d2, queen b6 check, black's initiative just develops very, very quickly. So king h1, rook to d8. And now the pieces are super active. The knight is pinned. I'm threatening e3. And also stuff like knight to d5, which is very annoying. So knight c3 was needed in order to kind of avoid this pin. And then after queen b6, king h1, I think this position is not as clear, but I think black is still very, very active, like even something like queen c6, and I quite like my chances. But yeah, that was the way to play. So starting with knight d2, things just go very wrong for white. Rook d8. Here I was expecting queen c1. I was going to go queen c6 and hitting the c-pawn, inducing c3, knight d3 takes. And then either take with the pawn or taking with the rook, maybe even stronger. And then black just has a just fantastic position, like super strong control over the light squares and so on. So instead, actually, things went wrong even faster. White goes a5, which looks like maybe useful inclusion, but now I just get queen c6 right away. And here after c3, knight d5 is quite strong. Of course, I could go knight d3 as well, but now knight d5 with the queen on d1 is even better because I'm threatening to take the bishop and go bishop g5, which is pretty bad. And if the bishop moves, then knight e3 just picks up the exchange. So this is basically game over. Black is winning the exchange, and white isn't going to have any particular compensation for it. So queen c2 played. I took bishop g5, rook f1. I think, okay, this is a good try from white, but yeah, I felt like white doesn't even have a pawn for the exchange, so the conversion should be pretty smooth. I definitely had to work a little bit, but I liked how I handled things. Queen c7. I thought this was kind of a nice way to simplify the position because I'm threatening to take the e-pawn, and so if knight e4, queen takes e5, black is just kind of in total control. And if queen e4, then of course the knight is hanging, so that's not good for white either. And lastly, if queen a4 check, queen d7, I realize as long as I get the queens off, I can give one pawn back, play something like rook d5, and black should just be winning this very smoothly because I'm going to take back one of these pawns. King comes up to e7, the other rook comes in somewhere, d8 or b8, and yeah, should be very straightforward conversion for black. So white played rook takes e4 with the idea of bishop meeting bishop f5 with like queen a4 check, and black doesn't win any material, but now I just go queen takes a5, and yeah, it's equal pawns. I have no weaknesses. It's kind of cool. I haven't castled yet, but I'm probably going to very soon. And yeah, game continued pretty logically. Rook e3, castles, h3, queen c5, bishop c4. I thought this was a good decision, just trading off the bishops, giving my rooks a little bit more scope in the position. And now I just play for some activity here. Queen f4, rook f8. And here, okay, kind of set a little trap for the opponent, because it looks like knight h5 is at least unpleasant. White has rook to g3 coming with some potential threats, but this actually just walks into rook d1 check, which allows black to simplify and end the game immediately. White has to take the rook. I take on e3. And now I'm just a clean exchange up. The knight on h5 isn't really doing anything. The e-pawn is lost, and soon black will just take, trade queens, and just convert very, very easily. So here my opponent resigned. He realized it's just completely hopeless, and yeah, that was it. So I felt pretty good about this game. It was nice to actually win a game in the tournament, and I felt like it was a pretty smooth win as well. Of course, the opponent, I feel like he definitely didn't play his best chess in this one, but overall I felt like it was a pretty instructive Sicilian game. So I was definitely happy with that one. So going on to round 5, I was on an even score now, 2 out of 4. And I was paired against a Greek player, Antonios Xylogiannopoulos, who's about 2250 FIDE. And I prepared some different stuff for the game, but I remember being surprised in the opening. We got a Queen's Gambit declined. I went knight f3, and my opponent played h6. And yeah, this is one of those lines that's been around for a little while, but yeah, I haven't really done any kind of specific preparation here, so I was already somewhat on my own and just playing according to principles. I decided to develop normally. The main idea of the system, as far as I understand, is to save a tempo on this move bishop e7 and to play bishop straight to d6 in a lot of positions, when then the h6 move ends up being useful. So objectively, this move I think seems actually quite sound for black, but it still leads to Queen's Gambit declined kind of position. And I think, in general, if you're a d4 c4 player, you're always kind of happy to play some kind of Carlsbad or something, even if it's objectively not super advantageous for white. So I didn't mind this too much. Knight c3, knight f6. I decide to exchange and go bishop f4, bishop d6, and now bishop to e5. And this is an idea I remember just learning about a couple years ago, just watching, I think it was Grandmaster Peter Svidler doing commentary on the FIDE World Cup or something. He just mentioned this move is an interesting idea in these positions, and yeah, I've taken a liking to it. I've played similar ideas in the a6 lines that are very, very similar to this. Basically, black plays a6 instead of h6, and you get the exact same position. And the point is just to be a little bit annoying with the bishop. Black doesn't really want to take too quickly because of d takes e5, and eventually black has to just kind of go like queen e7, knight d7, block the bishop in on c8, and force white to take on d6. So we end up getting just a very kind of normal Carlsbad position. I really don't think white got anything special here. Queen e7, bishop d3. Apparently it was much more accurate for black at one of these moments to take on e5 and go knight d7, where white's not really in time to go f4 because of c5 is kind of annoying, but after knight f3, rook e8, black's queen is better placed on e7, and black is ready to play knight e4. So this actually I think is a better version compared to what happened in the game where black goes knight d7, I take on d6, and we get the same exact structure, except now black has to spend an extra tempo putting the queen back on e7. So kind of a small nuance, but maybe black could have equalized like that. So we get this position, which, yeah, to my eyes just felt like a very normal Carlsbad structure. White has the typical plan of like the minority attack with rook b1, b4, b5. Black is typically playing for either like knight e4 or to put a knight on d6, somehow bring out the bishop, possibly even trade it off. And yeah, it's a very rich position. I think very, very playable. Generally, black is very, very solid, so it's hard for white to break through. But okay, it's always kind of a fun and an interesting game. So queen e7, I went knight d2 to cover the e4 square. Knight b6, rook b1, bishop e6. I was kind of surprised black didn't just go a5, but he had a different setup in mind. So he allows me to go b4 and now just plays a6. And black's idea is that when white goes a4 and b5, they want to just take with the c pawn, a takes b5, and then push past with a5. And that's how they want to deal with white's typical advance. So it's not that simple for white to break through here on the queen side, but there are other plans like a4, a5, bringing the knight to c5, and so on. So there are definitely always ways to put pressure. So I go a4, knight fd7. I was really expecting here the move knight c4, and on the next move as well, knight d7, I play knight b3. And I was definitely expecting it here. And yeah, I don't think black actually has any issues if they play this one. B4, of course, wasn't hanging because of knight c5, and then black's queen here ends up getting trapped. But yeah, I thought knight c4 would happen, and if I take and play like knight c5 or knight a5, I thought black is actually doing okay here. For example, knight b6, and yeah, to me it wasn't obvious at all that white is better in this position. It's like a very dynamic structure. It's hard to push the central pawns. But as I realized after the game, the opponent was basically just kind of relying on this plan to go c takes b5 and a5 against any b5 push. And so in his mind, I think he was just kind of focused on just not moving this knight from b6. But yeah, during the game, this was like the main move I was always kind of considering for black. Instead in this position, black played queen h4, which at first glance I was really happy to see, because I didn't really believe in black's initiative just on first glance. I felt like I have a lot of pieces that I can incorporate into the king side here. And in general, if black is playing on the king side and going like g5 and stuff, then of course this gives white a lot of chances to break through on the queen side. So right away, okay, I understood black wants to probably sack on h3 at some point. I wasn't sure if it's a threat immediately because there's like bishop f5, but I wanted to kind of deal with this in some way. So I go knight c5, basically just activating the piece. I think this is a good move. If black takes here, then, like I mentioned, I can either, I think, take here first, or it's probably just going to go bishop f5 and then take on d7, and then this just doesn't work for black. There's not enough play. So knight f6, and now, okay, I can take on b7, but this looked quite scary after takes on h3, takes, queen takes, bishop f5, knight g4. I wasn't quite seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here. It just looked very, very risky to go for this, and I didn't want to allow a draw, of course. So now I felt like I had to make a move on the king side. I go rook fe1. I think knight e2 here is actually stronger, and I don't remember why I rejected this move, but the idea is white just wants to take on e6 at some point, go knight f4, and yeah, eventually b5 will come, and white's just going to blast through on the queen side, with black's queen on h4 just being kind of severely misplaced. But rook fe1 is fine. I'm setting up bishop f1 in case of any kind of future sacrifices, so that I can just immediately cover the king. Black played rook e7, covering the b pawn, and yeah, now I go knight e2, and I have this threat like knight f4, knight takes e6, followed by knight g6, winning material. So black goes g5. But yeah, I was definitely happy to see this move, because I realized black is not threatening g4 here. So if white just makes some random move, black goes g4. I can meet this with g3 and queen h3, knight f4. The queen is nicely trapped. Or if the queen goes back to g5, then h4, I just shut down the king side. If queen h5, then knight f4. I get h4 again with tempo, and then any kind of situation like this would just be strategically lost for black, because the king side is closed, black has a bunch of like weaknesses, and of course white's still opening up the queen side and everything, even without b5, and this would just be terrible for black. So since g4 is not really a threat, I felt like, okay, this is quite nice for white. And here I end up doing something concrete. So I start with the move a5. The point is, okay, knight d7, then I take on b7, so the knight is forced back to c8. And yeah, here I just realized I have some concrete opportunities, starting with knight takes e6. So the main idea here is that if fe, this happened in the game, I have this move bishop takes a6, where I sack the bishop, but the point is queen g6 check is coming, and then white is winning back the piece. And if rook takes e6, then I realize bishop f5 and g3 here is just leading to a totally dominating position, because black's queen is just running very short on squares. I've got king g2 coming, and so for example, queen h5, king g2, then I want to go g4 and knight g3, for example. Eventually the knight gets to f5, black's queen is just kind of stuck, and yeah, strategically black is kind of busted here. So I was looking forward to playing that position, but black played fe, which maybe was just a better try overall. And yeah, now I calculated a bit. Bishop takes a6. It wasn't as simple, because black can go knight e4 here, and white does have to see the follow-up to this move, because otherwise it could just be bad for white, because the bishop is hanging and f2 is hanging as well. But I have this move f3, which is quite important. And now I'm not losing a piece. I'm going to be taking on e4, and then eventually this pawn will take on d5 or push, and I'll still get all the counterplay associated with queen g6 check. In the meantime, the king side is opening up, and black's knight on c8 is just a terrible piece. It's just sidelined from the action. It's in the way. It's blocking the back rank. The rook is also blocked. And so I realized that any kind of opening of the king side, even if I lose a pawn or something, has to be just great for my rooks and pieces. So queen f2 check play. This was kind of mandatory. King h2. Now if black were to, let's say, take the bishop somehow, I would take on e4, queen takes e3, and I think I was mainly just looking at e takes d5 here, for example, and after e d5, let's say knight to g3, I'd be willing to give up the two rooks for the queen here, because in the resulting position, white's queen gets in, knight f5, and white's queen and knight should just decimate the king side, probably win a piece at some point, and yeah, just totally game over here. And after other moves, of course, the rook is hanging on e7, so like queen takes d4, knight f5 is a problem here, and queen f4, queen g6 check as well. So yeah, basically felt like things are looking very good. Black did try this move g4, And which is kind of tricky because the point is if I take on e4, then black takes on h3, threatening mate. I can't move the knight because my queen is hanging on c2. And if I go rook g1, then rook g7. I wasn't seeing easy move here of a defense. And rook takes g2 is coming, and it looks like I'm just getting mated. So, although I'm realizing now, maybe I had king takes h3. Although it still looks unnecessarily complicated. Black can take it at any point, like take their piece back. So yeah, definitely right not to allow this. Instead, I go rook f1, which doesn't give black time to open up the king side. Takes on e3, take here. Now if gh3, I have rook f3, and black's queen is in trouble. Like rook g3 is coming. If queen takes e4, then bishop d3, and I'm just a piece up. So b takes a6. I took on d5, and yeah, essentially the king side is just opening up now, and my pieces are much better placed, and so it's just bad for black. I think ed5 here was the better way to recapture. I was planning to go knight g3, threatening knight f5, queen g6 check, and just going after black's king. c6 is also hanging, and I think it's just kind of a hopeless position. Instead, c takes d5 happened, which kind of accelerated the end, because here I just immediately get queen g6 check, and the point is, after rook g7, black doesn't have the e8 square covered. So if king h8, rook f8 is mate, rook g7 is forced, I play queen e8 check, and here the opponent resigned, because after king h7, I'm going to go rook f8, and black's king is just getting mated. Rook check is coming, other rook can come in at any point, and yeah, there's just no defense here. So that was the end of round 5, my second win in a row, and I was definitely happy with this one. I felt like the early middle game wasn't perfect. Like black could have definitely equalized had he found this knight c4 idea around here. But once the opponent kind of like, yeah, committed to the king side a little bit too early, I felt like I handled this part of the middle game, and then the resulting complications quite well. So overall, I was pretty happy with this game. So my next game, round 6, I was paired against a pretty young player from Finland, Oliver Ortiovaara. I think about maybe 18 years old or so. And actually, this game was fairly interesting right out of the opening, because I was mainly expecting 1 e4 here. I saw he'd also played some 1 d4, so I was prepped for that as well. But then he surprised me and he goes 1 knight f3. And so I like immediately spent like a little bit of time, and I was trying to understand what exactly he wanted. And I felt like actually he is probably going for a King's Indian, because of course I'm playing the King's Indian every game, and he's probably wanting some kind of like fianchetto system without c4, like bishop g2, d4, and then not playing c4, but some other move like rook e1, knight c3. There's a lot of moves in that resulting position. I wasn't really ready to meet all these sidelines, so I started thinking like, how else can I play here? And I think I came up with a very clever idea to go c5. And I'm not normally proud of like my first move decisions, but I think this one was quite good, because I invite him back into the Sicilian, which I was prepared for, and I figured since he played 1 knight f3, then he's not he didn't spend hours and hours preparing the Sicilian. So if he ends up playing e4, then I'm totally comfortable there. And the difference here is that now he doesn't get all the typical fianchetto lines, like, because now when white goes d4, black just takes, and he doesn't get the system that he's aiming for. So if he's not willing to go e4 and go into the Sicilian, where maybe he's not super well prepared, then he's kind of forced to play in English, and this is what we end up getting, which I also think wasn't what he had in mind. At least that was my instinct during the game. Maybe he had planned to play this anyway, and then it doesn't matter. But I felt like actually it was very clever move order, because it kind of forces him into maybe something that he wasn't ready for. And then after the game, he confirmed that, in fact, yeah, this wasn't the plan. He did want to play one of those fianchetto sidelines. And so this is actually very fortunate that this worked out. Because we get this system, which is like the symmetrical English, but I have some experience in this line and I felt pretty comfortable. And it also, you know, it's not often that I'm able to get my opponent out of their preparation on move one with black, having, you know, a pretty fixed repertoire where I play the same thing every game. So I thought that was kind of cool. Anyway, I go e6 here. I've been quite fond of this system in all these positions where black's knight goes to e7 and then b6, bishop b7 to follow. He goes e3, which I think is the most challenging way to play. So when he played e3, I was like, "Ooh, I don't know, maybe he did prepare this. I'm not sure anymore." But knight e7, d4, castles, b3, knight f5. Black is essentially okay here. We're putting enough pressure on the d pawn, and here after white goes knight e2, e5. I think black is basically fine. We're just kind of equalizing in the center. If d5, the knight will go somewhere, and we just get kind of a typical King's Indian, which we're happy with. And after d takes e5, de, I think black is just not worse here. We have good good development here, and we're fighting for the d file as well. So this is what happened. Main move here is actually knight d2. I wasn't super familiar with the theory, but there's a few games like knight d2, knight d6, and things are about equal. Black typically follows up like queen e7, rook d8, and just develops the pieces, has a reasonable space advantage. White tries to use the e4 and d5 squares, and so on and so forth, but it's just a positional game. My opponent decided to trade queens on d8, which I wasn't too unhappy to see. Rook takes d8, and now he goes knight to g5. And yeah, I started spending some time here because I'm definitely out of book at this point and just trying to figure out the position. Here, white is maybe looking at bishop d5, maybe bishop takes c6, maybe trying to just get some kind of structural advantage. So I was pretty happy with my next move, which turns out is like, we're still following theory, and this move has been played in a couple of games, knight fe7. I kind of liked it. I mean, it's like, feels like going backwards a little bit, but it covers the d5 square, it covers c6 nicely. It allows me to play b6 as well, which is kind of important because otherwise bishop a3 could be a problem. And I felt like the knight on f5 actually isn't really doing a whole lot. It doesn't have any great prospects, so from e7 at least it's defending some squares, and it's not in the way of the bishop. So I felt like I got a good setup here. Bishop a3, I went h6 to kick the knight, now b6, rook to d1, and bishop e6. And yeah, I felt like white can come in with knight d6 here, but it's not really dangerous. Because I'll play rook to d7, eventually rook d8, and yeah, this knight will be kind of awkward. So instead white goes knight 4c3, which I actually thought was the best way to play the position, going after the d5 square. And my idea was to try to just get f5, e4, and then take some space on the king side. And if I can shut down the bishop, then maybe I can try to overtake the advantage. So f5, knight d5. Now knight c7 is threatened, so rook a c8. White played rook to d2 here. This is the first move that I thought maybe my opponent is starting to go wrong. I really thought he should go e4 before black has a chance to play e4. In this position, I thought, I mean, must be very, very close to equal. Even though white is giving up the d4 square, it's not that easy for me to put the knight there. Of course, the knight on e7 is hanging. And yeah, I thought actually it's very balanced. If king f7, you know, white has f4, and it's not that safe for black out here. So I thought this is definitely just going to be close to equal. Apparently there was some game where black played g5 and eventually ended up doing fine. But yeah, after rook d2, e4, now black just gets to shut down white's bishop, starts taking space. I get the e5 square and all these ideas like knight e5, knight d3, or knight f3 check. And of course, after like bishop takes d5, for example, or king f7. And yeah, here I definitely just start playing for the win. So rook fd1. I go bishop takes d5, cd, and now knight e5. And yeah, here I definitely am just kind of playing strategically. I'm going for some kind of good knight, bad bishop situation. And I want to blockade the d-pawn, eventually maybe try to push the queenside majority. And if I can get b5, c4 going, knight to d3, of course, that just feels like... actually, it's almost like a Benoni type of position now, because black has this queenside play. So knight f4, rook d6. And here white goes bishop to b2. I was actually really expecting knight e6 here and something like this. And it's actually still, I think, very difficult for black to convert, but it definitely feels like a little bit more pleasant. Like black's pieces are all coming in, and yeah, white always has to worry about some tactics like with knight takes d5 and going after the e6 knight. But that was definitely the way to go. After bishop to b2, white allows knight f3 check. And I definitely wanted to jump on this opportunity because takes. I get this pawn on f3, and I feel like long term, this is a very, very annoying pawn to deal with. And I also felt like my knight was going to be able to get to g6 and e5 in the near future. White's d pawn is stuck. And so, yeah, I just felt like black has all these like overwhelming strategic factors going my way. So takes, king takes g7, and now g4. And yeah, to be honest, I definitely underestimated this move when going for this position. I thought actually I'm just doing really well. Like g5, g4 is coming. Again, knight g6, knight e5. Eventually this pawn just gets picked up because my king is actually going to be participating in the game. And that means that long term, this d pawn is kind of a huge weakness. But after g4, if I take this one, white goes e4 and gets these like two very strong pawns in the center. And yeah, I definitely didn't like the looks of this. I thought I might even just be losing in some lines. It turns out actually after king f6, it's quite good for black. Like I was afraid of knight d3, but black just goes rook d7 or rook to d8. And yeah, white actually can't really do anything with the pawns without just losing them. Black's pieces are placed very, very well to deal with any kind of pawn pushes. And next I'm ready to go like g5, knight g6, knight e5, just kind of totally blockade the pawns. Eventually like rook f8, rook f4, b5, c4, just start pushing the queen side. And yeah, if white's pawns are stuck, then black's just completely winning. But this just wasn't obvious to me during the game. And of course, black is up a pawn, so that's kind of important too. So yeah, FG actually was the right decision there. I ended up playing king f6, just trying to like keep the structure stable so that white can't push e4. But this position actually was not obvious to me that I could win it. So white goes king h1. I go rook to g8. And the problem is it's hard for me to go after the d pawn because like rook c d8, king to e5, white's going to play like knight to d3, and then there's some tactics like it's hard to take on d5 successfully. But yeah, I started with this move, rook to g8, and I really wasn't sure what I was going to play if white just played h3 here, for example. Because it's not obvious what my plan is. Like, I don't have a great infiltration square. King e5 is met with knight d3 check, and then I can't take on d5. And yeah, so if white just sits and waits, it's kind of hard for black to make progress. Maybe knight g6 somewhere, knight to e5. Definitely not the easiest position for white to hold, but yeah, I wasn't totally sure that I'm winning here. But then my opponent just makes a very surprising blunder, rook g1. And yeah, it wasn't clear to me actually what he had miscalculated. But when he played this, I was surprised. I thought I missed something. I was like, uh-oh. I was like, what did I miss here? But no, I realized, you know, he had just messed up. Because after takes king e5, white's d pawn is just lost. So if knight d3 check, then king to e4. And I'm defending this pawn. And after knight e1, I can just take knight takes d5 here. And yeah, we got like rook g6 check, and then this pawn is super strong, and basically white is just losing the pawn and has losing endgame, as black's pieces are much more active. So yeah, here basically it's over. I'm collecting the pawn. He tried rook c2, knight takes d5, knight d3 check. Now the idea is if I play king e4 here, knight e1 followed by rook c4 is kind of annoying, and white can actually win the pawn back. So I just played back king f6 here. And now after knight e1, he can get the f3 pawn, but I'm in time to just hit him on the queen side. So knight b4. Now if rook stays here, there's rook d1. So rook c1 is forced. I can take on a2. And yeah, the queenside pawns here are just too strong. Actually, I regretted not playing king e6 here. And the reason is after knight e1 in the same line, I could go knight b4, rook c1, and knight d3, and just force a trade of knights. And actually, the rook endgame, I think, would be quite trivial here. where White's king is stuck on the back rank. I have rook d2 coming. My king is more active. I have this like easy pass pawn on the queen side. I think this is just like resignable for White because it's just so bad with this f pawn. In the game, I put the king on f6, and so now I don't have this knight d3 move because of rook d1. So it's still winning for black, but I felt like I had to work a little bit more here. So takes, knight c3. If takes on a7, then there's rook d1, followed by like knight e4, knight d2, and White's just losing on the back rank. So he plays knight takes f3. I go a5. I'm still a pawn up here. King f1, and I was happy with my conversion. I put the knight on c3 here specifically instead of b4, so I can get rook to d3, where the knight covers the e2 square. I'm eyeing this b pawn, and I have kind of a sneaky threat to push f4, taking advantage of the pin on the third rank, and win a second pawn, which would be pretty serious. But yeah, White doesn't really have a lot of great options here. If knight e1, just like rook d2 and knight e4, rook b2, I'm just kind of coming in. So king e1 played, but this allows f4, and black wins the second pawn, and yeah, it's just over. Knight d2 takes, knight c4, and White resigned. He didn't even wait for me to make my move, which rarely happens to me, but yeah, I was just thinking about what to do. There's some good options here for black. All of a sudden he resigned, which I definitely was happy to see. I think the simplest would have been to just take here with check, and then go knight e4 check, followed by rook takes b3, and then it's okay, 3 connected passers on the queen side. So probably like in view of this line or something, you know, the opponent realized like it's just hopeless. So yeah, third game in a row that I won. I was definitely happy with the streak. It wasn't like a perfect game. I guess the one blemish was after g4. I really should have just taken this one. And after playing a good game, I definitely needed some help from the opponent, because this was a pretty serious blunder with rook to g1. I think, of course, if h3 here or some other move, then yeah, the result would have been much more up in question. But yeah, still felt like a pretty nice, clean, technical game, and I was definitely happy with the result. So after round 6, I was now on 4 out of 6, and definitely feeling like I was back in the tournament. Okay, that's going to do it for this recap. This was part 2. I'll cover the last 3 games in part 3. So stay tuned for that on this channel. Definitely make sure to subscribe and follow. And yeah, see you guys next time. Take care.